Good morning and happy Sabbath. It's great to be back. I'm going to give you guys a quiz from my last sermon 6 months ago. No, actually I do have a small gift. First hand up can get it. It's an I love you whether you do or not Mongolia keychain. Okay, you're going to have the answer before I even ask the question, right? All right, does anybody remember what the capital city of Mongolia is? All right. Ulaanbaatar. Could we pass this back, please? Could you pass this back to her? Thank you. So when I left Ulaanbaatar 3 weeks ago to begin my speaking tour this time around, it was already -17. That is Celsius, so it's not as bad as what you guys are thinking, but it is frigidly cold. So everyone keeps asking me, aren't you cold? Aren't you cold? But I'm not. I'm loving this weather. This is great. It's above zero. Okay, so if we can get our PowerPoint ready, I want to talk to you a little bit about how God's timing works. According to this scripture reading, we all have our own plans and we lay things out. They don't always necessarily go the way we expect, and a lot of times we end up with taking detours that we really had not planned on. But ultimately, in the big scheme of things, we need to remember that God's timing is perfect. It's not ours. Okay, so in their hearts, we humans, we plan our course. I think I spoke with the high school group last spring briefly, and I was telling them about my 5-year plan and my 10-year plan, and I'm your meticulous type A personality, and everything had to just all line up. And when one thing goes awry, what happens? All your plans just crumble. Well, remember that even though we have our plans, it's God who establishes the steps, and it's God who's going to lead you, and it's God who's going to time everything just right. Now, if you guys remember, Moses, our baby in the bushes, he knew from a young age that he was destined to eventually help and save the Israelite people. He was raised at the knee of his mother Jochebed until he was 12, before he was sent back to the Pharaoh's palace and to his foster mother, his adopted mother. You remember, he lived there about 40 years. He was trained in all of the princely administrative duties. He was set to be the heir apparent. And however, in his heart, he also knew that he was going to be used by God to save his people. He just didn't know how or when, and so he took matters into his own hands. So if you remember, it came to pass in those days, Moses was out and about, and he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating one of his Hebrew brethren. And so he looked all over the place. This is kind of like my kids. When they know they're doing something wrong, they have to check and see, is mom around? They do their quick 360, okay, the coast is clear. And then what did he do? He actually slew this Egyptian. And it says that he buried him in the sand. Now, apart from the Hebrew that he saved, he thought that this deed was unknown. And that was obviously not the case. And so what happened the next day? Remember? I'm not actually sure if it was the next day. He was out and about, and he saw 2 fellow Hebrew brothers fighting. And he's like, what's going on? And one was beating the other, and he was obviously in the wrong. So Moses tried to break up the fight. He's like, listen, what are you guys doing? Don't beat up on each other. And the guy turned and said to him, why? What are you going to do? You're going to kill me too, just like you killed that Egyptian taskmaster? And Moses knew then that his secret deed was known. Word got back very quickly to the Pharaoh. And of course, the story always grows out of proportion. And it was warped. And it got to the point where it was like, oh, you do realize that Moses is going to, this is just the beginning. He is not just going to kill one taskmaster. He's out to take your throne. So Pharaoh issued a death warrant. And then what happened? Everybody knows Moses ran away. Okay, so Moses was too fast in slaying the Egyptian. He supposed that the people of Israel understood that God's special providence had raised him up to deliver them. But God did not design to deliver the children of Israel by warfare, as Moses had thought, but by his own mighty power, that the glory might be ascribed to him and him alone. It's the same concept. If Moses is out there slaying soldiers right and left, who is the savior of the Israelite people? It's Moses. God wanted the people to know that God and God alone was going to deliver them. But I love this phrasing. This is found in Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 1. Moses was too fast. Okay, there are a lot of times when we jump the gun. We think, oh, no, I know what's going to happen. I know what to do, and I'm just going to get on it right now. But we take things a little too quickly. We're not following the right pace, and we go too fast. Now, Moses ended up spending 40 years out in the middle of nowhere with the Midianites. The time had fully come when God would have Moses exchange the shepherd's staff for the rod of God, which he would make powerful in accomplishing signs and wonders in delivering his people from oppression and in preserving them when pursued by their enemies. Now look at that. The time had fully come. Who was to designate this? How did Moses know that during his 40 years in Midian that God was preparing him for a life of humility and service and love for his sheep, his flock? 40 years, that's already now half of his lifetime. He'd spent the first 40 in Egypt, living the high life as a prince, as the heir apparent to the kingdom. Then he was a fugitive, and he spent the next 40 years living the humble life of a shepherd. But look at the wording. The time had fully come. Now contrast that with Moses was too fast. This is God's timing. Okay. Does anybody know who this is? Anyone? Okay, come on, my generation and up, we may. Okay. Does the name sound familiar? Atari? Come on, you guys, Asteroids? It was like the first prototype video game. Okay, definitely preaching to the wrong generation. Okay, I see some gray hairs out there, so you guys have to know. Atari was the computer game. In fact, it really was a prototype for all of home video gaming. Now, Atari, this is back in the 70s. Nolan Bushnell, this amazing visionary, he decided that he was going to build up Atari into everybody's home. Everybody needed to have a home gaming system. It wasn't just a matter of going out to an arcade and playing video games. And he grew this company, and it was very well known back in the late 70s, and much better known than, say, this person and his company. Okay, now we're at the right generation, right? You guys all know who this is, even though he did pass away. Okay, this is Steve Jobs. Okay, now, when Steve Jobs was a youngin' and Apple was just getting off the ground, he actually approached Nolan Bushnell for funding. Okay, this is very little known. At that time, he and Wozniak, I believe, I can't pronounce his name properly, okay, they had gotten stuff together. They were building the prototype for Apple I, and they needed funding. This is well before venture capitalism, right? Okay, so Steve Jobs had gotten an entry-level job at Atari. That's how big Atari was back then. And he went, he's got some, gall, right? He just went up and was like, listen, if you give me $50,000, back then that was a huge amount, right? This is 1970s. I'll give you a third share in my company. So they were going to be three-way partners. And look at what Nolan Bushnell has to say about this. In 1976, Steve Jobs asked me if I would put $50,000 in, and he would give me a third of the company. But I was so smart, I said no. It's kind of fun to think about this when I'm not crying. Okay, so that was in 2011. In 2012, at the beginning of 2012, according to CNN Money, Apple was valued at $600 billion. Okay, 50,000. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine how Nolan Bushnell must have been beating himself up? Well, you guys remember, Apple was the first one to close over $1 trillion. This was in September just of last year. Actually, it hit $1 trillion, dropped back down. But as of September 14th of this year, Apple's net worth is valued at $1.01 trillion. Okay, how many zeros is this? Okay, Nolan Bushnell is alive and well, but not a shareholder, not a majority shareholder in Apple. He was probably spending a lot of time crying. Okay, what happened here? Yeah, he missed his timing. He got the right opportunity, but because he was a little full of himself, he was a little full of Atari. Remember, Atari was the company. In fact, if you go back in business history, Atari was the fastest growing company of that period. Okay, nobody had reached those levels that quickly ever before. So, in a way, he had a right to be proud, but I think he was a little too full of himself. So here's this little startup boy. Who is this Steve Jobs hippie boy? He doesn't know anything. $50,000 bucks. You coming in here and asking for this big money? Oh my! He I'm sure. He admits it. In the biography it was Steve Jobs' biography, they came and interviewed him. He's like, yeah, I cried a lot. I can only imagine. All right, we're going to do a little bit of history and math here, okay? I hated calculus in high school, so math is not my forte, but this is simple arithmetic, so we should be okay. All right, I want to go back and look at King Josiah. If you guys remember, he was our child king. We have pictures of him in Uncle Arthur's, and the Bible stories and stuff like that. I loved his story because, he was only 8, but he knew what was right and what was wrong. And he began his reign because his father was an evil, wicked king, Ammon, and he died in early death. Well, his grandfather was even worse. Manasseh probably goes down in history as maybe the top 1, 2, 3 worst kings of Israel. Just horrible. He was, sacrificing his children to, just horrible. Manasseh died, Ammon died, and they put Josiah on the throne at age 8. But even at age 8, it says that he had his heart in the right place. So Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 31 years in Jerusalem. And it says in the Bible that he did good in the sight of the Lord. He was a righteous king, even as a child. How many young children do we have in here? Are your guys' hearts in the right place? God can use 8-year-olds. Okay. Now, during his reign, he wanted to bring spiritual revival to Jerusalem. Now, Hilkiah was the high priest at that time, and he actually found the scriptures. Can you imagine? The scriptures were lost. They were buried. Now it came to pass in the 18th year of King Josiah. So how old is he now? Simple arithmetic, guys. Come on. 26, right? Okay. So King Josiah was 26, and they found the scriptures. Now, if we go back to 2 Kings in chapter 23, it talks about how Josiah, once the scriptures were found, he rent his clothes, wore sackcloth and ashes, and he mourned, and he grieved, and he repented. Number one, that the scriptures had been lost in the first place. How can the chosen nation lose God's word? But they had not only lost it, they'd buried it and forgotten about it, and they had turned against God. So the king went up to the house of the Lord, and with him all the men of Judah, and with him all the inhabitants of Judah, and he read in the hearing all the words of the book of the covenant which had been found. So we're not just talking a congregation of, priests, Levites. The entire inhabitant, the entire populace of Judah was called to listen to God's word. Then the king stood by a pillar, and he made a covenant before the Lord to keep his commands. And all the people took a stand with him. Okay, we don't know if all the people were very sincere about it, but hey, their king is in sackcloth and ashes, and the king says, we are making a covenant with God. They followed suit. So at this time, the 18th year of Josiah, when he was 26, Judah had a huge spiritual revival and reformation. The scriptures were being read, not just in the temple, on the streets. The people were turning their hearts back towards God. Okay, now we're going to do some math. All right, so take a look here. We're going to go through the history of the kings from Josiah onwards. Josiah came to the throne at age 8, and he reigned 31 years. The scriptures were found in the 18th year of his reign. So how many years were left after that? We got 31 minus 18. There were 13 years after the scriptures were found before Josiah died. And you know what? Josiah was such a righteous king that God actually promised him, there will be a horrible, horrible tragedy that will befall your kingdom, but I'm not going to let you witness it. I will let you go to sleep before this happens because you are my loving and faithful servant. He did not want Josiah to have to watch the fall of Jerusalem. Okay, after that, Jehoaz, who was one of Josiah's sons, came to the throne, and again, the Bible says he did evil in the sight of the Lord. He didn't even last very long. Necho from Babylon came in, raided, took him into captivity, and he only reigned 3 months. And he eventually died in captivity. So then, Jehoiakim, whose real name was Eliakim, also a son of Josiah, was placed on the throne by Necho. Okay, so he was, your puppet leader, but he also did evil in the sight of the Lord. Now listen to this. So we've got the 13 years from the finding of the scriptures, and then we had the 3-month, very short reign of Jehoahaz. So we're at 13 years and 3 months. Now look, Jehoiakim came to the throne at age 25, and he reigned 11 years. But what happened during those 11 years? Remember, he was also a puppet leader. At the 3rd year mark, so right there, see, he reigned 3 years, but Nebuchadnezzar came and took the captives away. That was at the 3rd year mark, and that's actually found in Daniel chapter 1. It actually tells us, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Okay, so interestingly enough, after Necho had come through, he had taken Jehoahaz as captive. He placed Eliakim, whom he renamed Jehoiakim, on the throne. And after he did that, he said, now you're going to have to pay tribute. And it was a hefty tribute. It was a burden. It was hard. But they did. And then after a while, Jehoiakim's like, oh, he got a little full of himself. He's like, I don't want to pay tribute anymore. So he stopped. And that's when Nebuchadnezzar came. Nebuchadnezzar basically came to punish Jehoiakim for not paying the tribute. So when he came, what happened? We know the story. We've read it multiple times, right? In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem, besieged it, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands. That wasn't it, though, right? Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there were no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. Okay, you know, Nebuchadnezzar was probably one of the most brilliant government leaders and administrators the world has ever known. Why? He was smart. He didn't just wipe out conquered nations. He assimilated them. He brought in the best, the cream of the crop. Number one, what does that do? That eliminates any potential leaders from rising in these conquered territories. But number two, it gives him a liaison to those conquered nations. He took the best and the brightest among them. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them, the chief of the eunuchs gave new names. He gave them Daniel, the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel, this is one of my favorite texts, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Wow. You have to remember, when Nebuchadnezzar came and he ordered Ashpenaz to gather the cream of the crop, how old were these people? Remember, they were youth, okay? That means they're not of legal age. All right, we don't know what legal is here. You know, it could be 18, 21. But back then, if we look through this, okay, when Daniel was taken captive, he was described as a youth. So generally, biblical scholars put his age at about 17 to 19. Now, why do we say that? Because, remember, how many years did they have to study in the University of Babylon? It's 3 years, okay? When they graduate from the University of Babylon, they need to be adults. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar is not going to put a kid in a position of power as a minister, as a wise man. So by the time they were considered adults, they had to have finished. They needed to be a certain age. Now, why 19? The reason is because according to the Bible, if you go back and you look at Numbers 32, during the big uprising and the whining and complaining and whinging and nagging of the 40 years before they entered Canaan, and when they refused to go in God's command, what happened? God said, by no means will any man 20 years or older enter the land of Canaan. What does that mean? The age of accountability was considered to be 20. So that meant these kids had not yet attained that age. They were 19 or younger. Okay? The reason they probably weren't 13 or 14 is after 3 years of University of Babylon, you don't graduate and become a minister when you're a teenager. Okay? So he was young. And in our book, and according to the biblical history, he was incredibly courageous. You don't go against, the king of Nebuchadnezzar. He gives you the best food from his tables. You better eat it. But because he had already found favor in the sight of the eunuchs, that meant that there was something about these guys that the chief of the eunuchs found to be truly appealing, something that he respected. Otherwise, he would have no reason whatsoever to acquiesce to these requests. But he did. Now, so if he was only about 17 to 19, now let's go. We're going to count backwards. If he was at that age, and we count back 16 years and 3 months, Daniel was a child, an infant, maybe a toddler, at the time that the scriptures were found. Okay? Why is that important? And what significance does this have in terms of God's timing? 16 years and 3 months, okay? If Daniel was 17, he was an infant. If he was 19, he was a toddler. But why is this important? At the time of the Reformation, that spiritual revival, that meant that Daniel's mother was part of that spiritual revival. How did she raise him? With the scriptures. She read to him. She taught him according to the biblical truths that had just been found. Is that coincidence? Oh, by no means, never. God's timing, can we go back one slide, please? Yes, God's timing is never coincidental. To everything, there is a season. There is a time for every purpose under the sun. God could have had those scriptures found at any other time during Israel's notorious history. Why then? Why 16 years and 3 months before Daniel was being taken captive? Because he needed Daniel to have been raised in that kind of environment for such a time as this. Okay? We talk about Esther and her timing. Again, if Esther had not lived during that time, and if she had not been raised under her uncle, cousin Mordecai's upbringing, when did cousin Mordecai live? He lived also during the spiritual revival. If those scriptures had not been found, Daniel would not have been the man that he grew to be. If that timing was not just perfect, Daniel would not have been chosen to go off and become one of the highest ministers in Babylon. Eventually, you remember, he rose to third in the kingdom. All of this is reflective of how God's timing works in our lives. We can't lose sight of that. You know, God is so precise, nothing is ever coincidental. Now, I want to show you a brief video. It may seem like we're heading off in a different...
Welcome to Mongolia, the land of endless blue skies, and welcome to the Mongolian Mission of Seventh-day Adventists, a proud member of the Worldwide Church of Adventist Brothers and Sisters. Gateway International Education Corporation is a newly established entity tasked with the responsibility of establishing an international junior high and high school for grades 6 through 12, the first of its kind here in Mongolia. Gateway International Academy will not only provide a strong Christian education for our young church members, but its outstanding reputation and attractive curriculum will draw many non-believers to the school, enabling it to serve as a valuable outreach tool. After planning and developing this project for the past 2 years, by the grace of God, it is slowly taking shape. We are finally moving forward with Phase 1 of construction for the new International Academy in Mongolia. The Gateway campus is located on 138 acres of beautiful rolling hills, only 25 kilometers outside the capital city of Ulaanbaatar. This is just far enough away to avoid the pollution, congestion, and commotion of the city, while being close enough for students and staff to commute if necessary. The long-term goals for Gateway International Education Corporation is to build not just an international academy, but also a wellness center, an agriculture center, a vocational school, and a full-service resort and recreation center. The preliminary construction phase of this vast project began in the spring with the installation of a perimeter fence. This fence not only serves as a security measure, but it prevents livestock from wandering onto the property while grazing on nearby lands. A traditional Mongolian ger was recently built to house our 24-hour security guards, who will alternate keeping watch over the campus every other week. We recently received the necessary permits to bring in a high-voltage electricity tower to the campus to serve all our electric power needs. Once power is up and running, we will dig several wells to provide water for all the buildings and the agriculture center. Laying the proper infrastructure for the campus is a high priority since we envision making this campus the center of Adventist education and ministry for many years down the road. Phase 1 of Gateway International Academy's building project will include the main classroom building, a cafeteria multipurpose room, a dormitory, an administration building, and 10 staff homes. The total estimated cost for Phase 1 is approximately $5 million. This includes the infrastructure for power, water, and sewage for all the buildings. This is by no means a small amount. However, this is God's project, and we believe that our great accountant holds all the means in the world within his hands, and that he has devout and generous stewards around the world who are ready to take up this cause and help bring this important project to fruition. Although outside financial assistance will be needed to cover the initial cost of building up the campus, the plans for the Gateway institutions call for complete financial independence within 5 years. Not only will the school be self-sufficient, but the additional income generated by the Agriculture Center and the resort will help meet the financial needs of all the other Gateway entities. In fact, the long-term goal for Gateway is to be a strong commercial resource to help the Mongolia mission attain financial independence. Mongolians, with their natural talent for languages and their central location in the heart of Asia, are the perfect people to train up and send out as missionaries throughout this region, into many areas where others would be less welcome. In order to do so, they need a strong spiritual foundation, and that is where the Gateway institutions will step in. We plan to prepare an entire army of end-time missionaries to fulfill the call of the Great Commission. If you have been inspired by this video and touched by the Spirit to partner with us in this pioneering ministry, please contact us. We not only need funds, we need people. We need teachers in all subject areas. We need administrators. We need agriculturists. We need instructors for various trades for our vocational school. We need you. If you feel moved to donate to this project, please check out our website for specific funding needs and give as generously as you are able. And please pray for us. Pray for the Gateway Ministries and for the Lord to continue moving in a mighty way here in Mongolia. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Mashich bayirla. 감사합니다. Thank you very much.
All right, that video may seem like it came out of nowhere, but there's a reason for that too. Because, as I shared with you the last time I came, God has called us back to Mongolia. This definitely was not according to my timeline, nor my husband's, nor probably even my children. We did not expect or plan to go back to Mongolia at this time. We had always wanted to go back to Mongolia. It was in our plans, in retirement, after all the kids were grown and off in college and our responsibilities were taken care of, after we had our nice Uncle Sam pension, then we were going to go off to Mongolia and anywhere else God called. We figured, okay, now we're independent, we're tent-making missionaries. We can go wherever God wants us to go, but not now. Not now. And I think I remember telling you guys about how I threw out a bunch of Gideon tests, not because I really wanted assurance that this was God's plan, but as an excuse to not go. So you pick the 4 toughest things that you think are going to be impossible for God to follow through on. And again, is anything impossible for the Lord? Never. And so all 4 of them, boom, 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 boom. And we were kind of left, now what do we do? And even then, we still tried to avoid it. And then finally, I remember telling you about my little daughter, my youngest, Jaira. She was about 7. She came up and said, Mom, if you keep trying to run away like this, God is going to send a big fish to swallow you. And then you are going to smell really, really bad. And then I'm not going to hug and kiss you anymore. And it was heartbreaking. It was shaming. We were embarrassed in front of our children. Did it take a 7-year-old to teach her parents to submit to God's will? Unfortunately, it did. But after that, we realized, okay, we are not going to be those kind of parents who say one thing and do another. And so we had a big family powwow. sat down our 4 kids, and we said, okay, this is, all right, the family is not a democracy, okay? However, we're going to pretend like it is, and you guys all get a say. So you guys get to vote. Is now the right time? Do we accept this call? Do we go back to Mongolia? And all 4 of them said, yes, we need to. It has not been easy. It's been 2 years now since I've returned. And sometimes I still wonder, I'm like, God, are you sure the timing was right? Okay, but when has God's timing ever been off? It never has. It's just that we are sometimes too fast, or sometimes we miss the boat, and sometimes we're just not ready when God's ready. But at that time, I realized, okay, I'm going to, number 1, need to learn some patience. Okay. Number 2, I'm going to need to keep my eyes and ears peeled and open and ready to listen to the Spirit, to know what His promptings are. If we don't know, then even when God's calling us, okay, now's the time, we're not going to realize that. So we are in Mongolia, and when I told you about this project, I wanted to share a couple interesting stories about how God's timing has affected me in my life. Okay, this is very funny. If you look now, this is not a current Sprite can. I don't drink Sprite, so I don't know. But this is from circa 1990s. Okay, and when I was there the first time in Mongolia, I think I told you some of the nightmare stories. But at the same time, there were some really touching, really, fuzzy, warm moments. And one of those was with a fellow expat named Deborah. She was not an Adventist missionary. She was not an Adventist. She was non-denominational, but she had a deep love for the Lord, and she just packed up her bags and went to Mongolia. I think she's crazier than I was. At least I had a sending organization, right? She just went by herself. At that time, she was exactly twice my age. I was 21. She was 42. But there were so few expats in Mongolia at the time. Everybody knew everybody. You could actually walk into the U.S. Embassy and just talk to the ambassador. That would never take place now. The embassy, the ambassador's wife, Nancy, was a good friend of mine. Everybody knew everybody. But again, there were very few Christians there. Now, Deborah was a Christian, and she realized, because I was all by myself, that, she would take me under her wing as a little sister. And so at Christmas time, she invited me to her little apartment. She's like, Joanne, you're alone, I'm alone, let's, spend Christmas together. I said, that's great, thank you so much, because I was really scared and lonely. And she had bought this can of Sprite, and she set it on the table, and she's like, this is your Christmas present. I had not seen anything so welcome ever before in my life. That was the best Christmas present ever. Remember, I'd been living off of potatoes and cabbage for 3.5 straight months. There were no other fruits, no veggies, no junk food at all. I didn't even see the can of soda. And get this, my salary at that time, $25 US a month, that can of soda was $1. So even if I could have, I never would have bought one. But she had bought this for me, and this was her gift to me. And, we had become good friends, and over dinner, she was telling me, she's like, man, I really like you Adventists, except for one thing. I'm like, what? I was thinking maybe I had done something wrong, or I had offended her. I'm like, what? And she's like, I just can't give up shrimp. I just kind of looked at her, I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, you guys are great, but you have some weird dietary restrictions. And, I really love my seafood, so I'm sorry, that Sabbath stuff, yeah, that's great. Jesus' second coming, yeah, that's great too, but yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not giving up shrimp. And, at first I thought she was joking. I thought, she's going to hinge her salvation on shrimp? But she was serious. She was into, shellfish, and she loved her bacon. And for her, giving that up was more than it was worth. But she continued Bible study with me, and she's like, maybe one day, I'll give you guys a try. But we became friends, very close friends, and we maintained that friendship until she left. So she left, I think it was in 1994 or 5. So I didn't see her for a long time, but we reconnected when she came out for my wedding. She actually flew from North Carolina, where she was living, all the way out to Southern California, where our wedding was held, because she was so excited. And she was very practical. This time, no Sprite. That was not our wedding gift. But she bought us a food dehydrator. She's like, you're going to need to take more stuff back with you to Mongolia, so dry all the fruit that you can. And she bought us this wonderful dehydrator. And then we lost contact again. And then, I always remembered her and prayed for her and stuff, but afterwards, you get caught up in your own life and you forget and you move on. Well, after our stint in Mongolia was over, in the fall of 98, we came back, my husband went to school, and we ended up living in Loma Linda. And he was a dental student at Loma Linda University Dental School, and from out of the blue, I got this weird phone call from the Loma Linda University, the admissions department, and they said, are you Chong-Sung Kim's wife? That was my husband's full name. And I said, yes. It's like, so your name is Joanne? And I said, yes. And she's like, was your maiden name Park? And I said, yes. I'm like, where are you going? Is this some sort of weird survey? What are we doing? Why are you asking me these questions? And she's like, well, there's this strange person who's calling, asking for your information. Can I give it to her? They have their privacy laws. I'm glad they heeded them. She checked with me first, and she's like, there's this lady named Deborah who's trying to contact you, and she says that she has called every single Adventist university. Oops, sorry, back. Oh, too far back. Okay, there we go. She said she called every single Adventist university that she could think of to find me. And then finally, bingo, she hit pay dirt when she called Loma Linda. And so I said, Deborah? I'm like, who's Deborah? And she's like, well, her name is Deborah Johnson. And I'm still wondering. She's like, well, she says she knows you and she's lost contact. And then ding, a light went off. I'm like, Deborah, Mongolia, Sprite, Deborah. And I'm like, yes, please give her my information. And so I hung up, and I actually just stood waiting by the phone, thinking she was going to call immediately. She didn't. But within a couple hours, I got this phone call, and she's like, Joanne. And I'm like, oh my goodness, Deborah, is this you? What's going on? How did you find me? She's like, oh my goodness, I called all these different schools. I looked up, at the yellow, I think it was the Yellow Pages back then, and she's like, and I finally found you, through Chong-Sung at Loma Linda. I'm like, I know, but why? Granted, we were good friends and stuff, but what was the urgency? Why did you have to hunt me down through all these schools? She's like, Joanne, I wanted you to be the first to know I was baptized into the Adventist church. Number one, I was so shocked, and then number two, the first thing that came out of you gave up shrimp? And she just started laughing. She's like, you know what, though? And I'm like, how? When did this happen? And she's like, you know what? God works in mysterious ways. And I've been telling you guys this all the time, right? And timing is everything, just not our timing. Well, she had moved back to North Carolina, and she was working as an ESL teacher, and she got into a horrible car accident. She nearly died, and she was broken, body and spirit. But when she was in the hospital chaplains came by to visit her all the time. Praise the Lord for chaplains, I tell you. And one of them kind of stood out from among the other chaplains, and he would come all the time, and he would ask, do you have any special prayer requests? What can I do for you? And and he's like, do you mind if I come again? She's like, no, please do. And then she just said, she just like scratched. There's just something strange, peculiar about him. Well, the Bible does tell us that we are to be a peculiar people. We should be peculiar. When people meet us, people should say, ooh, there's something strange that stands out about these people. Well, this chaplain was a peculiar chap. And Deborah finally, she was in the hospital for months. It took her months to recover. Finally, he came all the time to pray with her, to be with her, to ask if she had any special needs. And then finally, one day, she just got up the gumption. She's like, can I ask you a personal question? He's like, sure. He's like, are you an Adventist by any chance? And he was taken aback because, the chaplains are non-denominational. They don't have anything that says, I'm a Baptist minister, or, I'm an Adventist preacher, nothing like that. And he was like, yes, I am. But how on earth would you have known that? And she's like, well, you remind me of this girl. Well, do I look like him? No. And she's like, you remind me of this girl I knew many, many years ago. And he's like, a girl? He was like, that's a little strange. He's like, no, just the way you carry yourself, the way you talk, and he's like, really? And who was this young girl? And she's like, oh, she was this Adventist missionary in Mongolia. And he's like, well, does that bother you? Do you mind if I keep coming? Would you like to continue Bible study? No, she's like, yes, definitely. Well, he came and continued Bible study with her even after she was discharged from the hospital. And then finally, she made that decision. And she told me, after we were laughing, she's like, you know what? Shrimp wasn't even on the page anymore. She's like, none of that mattered anymore. But Joanne, let me tell you this. Even though he did the reaping, the harvesting, you were the one who planted the seed. And I was just crying buckets. And you know what? I met her last spring. Actually, when I came out here, after I left very early on Sunday morning because I knew this may be the only chance I would have to meet her. And I drove all the way to North Carolina just to spend a day with her before I had to get back to Atlanta and take my flight out. That's Deborah. She is now, oh great, if I tell you her age, then you'll know mine. Anyway, she's getting up in years. She's retired. But she is still as active as, she's the head deaconess in her church. She is working with the refugees, but from Eastern Europe, and she's teaching them English and helping them with placement. And she just recently became a CPS, Child Protective Services, I can't remember the legal term for it, but like a guardian for the young children. And she is as active as ever in the church. And she credits this with that little seed that was planted 27 years ago. Now, when she gave me that can of Sprite, little did I realize that the seeds that I'd been planting then would bear fruit a decade later. Okay? We don't know how God's timing works. It's not in our hands. We just do what we're told to do. Okay? I'm loving this quarter's Sabbath school lesson study. And if you read last week's God's Calling, were Ezra and Nehemiah specifically called? Yes, they were. Are you specifically called? Yes, you are. This week's the wall and all the challenges and the obstacles. Do you think Satan's going to just give you a free ride? Yes, go, collect your $200 and keep going. No, it's not going to be that way. Every step of the way, he will do everything he can to block your progress. And he is, and he has been, and he continues to do so. But the one thing that we can always gain courage and encouragement from is that the more Satan throws obstacles your way, the more you can be assured you're going in the right direction. Because Satan is not going to willingly give up any of his territory. And that includes in Mongolia. So why am I sharing that video in the middle of all this? Number one, we need to trust in the Lord with all our heart and don't lean on our own understanding, okay? And in all our ways acknowledge him and he will direct our path. And that's not just talking directionally, it's talking chronologically in terms of when and where we need to go. So this Mongolia project took 2 years just to get to this point. It took 1 year just to get our land permits. Why? Because, and here's another important factor, if you're going to do it, you better do it right. Don't do anything that can eventually be a stumbling block in God's plans. Okay, when we were getting the land permits, everyone's like, oh, you just need to grease some palms. And we're like, oh, no, we don't do that. Oh, those aren't bribes, those are lobbying fees. Well, we don't do that. Oh, no, that's not bribing. It's just an expedite fee. They've got all kinds of cute little euphemisms for everything, but when you get down to it, it's a bribe. And we don't work that way because, remember, who are we representing? We are representing the Lord. So if ever we do something that is slightly off track, it's not us that's going to come, well, it may come back and bite you in the rear too, but we are, famous Korean saying, we are like smearing dirt all over God's face, okay? We are taking away from his character of righteousness. Anything and everything that we do reflects directly onto God because we are God's representatives here. So we waited. And we waited. I'm like, okay, God, I feel like I'm wasting my time here. It's not like I'm progressing. You said you needed me here at this time, but I'm not going anywhere. And I just, but I remember I said I was going to learn patience. This is definitely not my strong point. And I gave Gideon, and I gave another Gideon test. I said, Lord, this is it. If we don't get this land permit by December 31st, I'm going to take this as a sign that this timing is not right, and I'm going to pack my bags and go back home. Well, remember, test God, try me, he says, and he will follow through. December 29th, we got our land permit. That was the beautiful 138 acres. Okay, when God follows through like that, at the last minute, there's also a reason for that. He is training us to rely wholly on Him. We had tried all kinds of avenues to get this land. We were working through these people, meeting with these government agents, and God's like, just hang tight. I've got things under control. December 29th, 2 days to spare. Then, one obstacle after another. We are getting ready to pull in power. Well, apparently, the power company that we contracted with was going to have to pull from like a high voltage line 3.5 kilometers away. Well, they either purposely hid it from us, or they were ignorant themselves. They didn't realize a government line was coming right past our property. So we signed this expensive contract with them, and then all of a sudden we're watching these power lines go up everywhere. We're like, okay, hold the phone. We're not contracting with these guys and paying for all of this when God has already brought the power right to us. You know what? It's not that simple. It's the winter freeze now. I told you, -17. Nothing's getting done. So we were unable to terminate the previous contract before we were able to sign with these new people. So it's right on our doorsteps, only 140 meters away, but we couldn't do anything yet. Again, there's got to be a reason for this, right? So we're praying. But you know what? All of the delays with the power, it was almost like God was telling us to wait. Don't waste all that money contracting with that company. I'm bringing the power to you. God trains you. And sometimes it's really hard. You don't run a marathon overnight, right? You've got to sweat through it. Well, all of these little problem points are God's way of teaching us to depend on Him more wholly. All right, so that brings me to my official spiel. Why am I here again? They're like, oh, I thought you were in Mongolia. You're back. Yes, I came back because now we are really getting ready to move forward to open the first International Adventist Academy in Mongolia. So the timing obviously wasn't right 27 years ago when I was there. It wasn't even right when I left in 1998. And it wasn't even ready 2 years ago. But we are moving forward now. God is opening the doors. And of course, Satan is going to continue throwing obstacles our way, but we are definitely moving forward. And God willing, the school will open next fall. So, why am I visiting Walla Walla, Andrews, Southern, even Burman? I'll be heading up to Canada. Why am I going to these places? Because we need teachers. Okay. Specifically, we need teachers in every subject matter. So don't say, oh, well, I don't qualify. I'm not in that field. Or we need every subject. We're starting this school from scratch. Middle school and high school, so grades 6 through 12. And you know what is the best part? We're in negotiations with the Ministry of Education. You don't even need a teaching credential. As long as you have a subject-specific bachelor's degree, we can take you. My older daughter, when I was at Andrews and sharing about this, she's like, oh, Mom, you left out some really important stuff because most young grads, they're really concerned about this. So you need to be very specific about how this is going to work financially. So I will tell you, it's not an SM position. You're not just going there and you have to fundraise your own airfare and stuff. This is an actual job opportunity. And it may sound kind of funny to be talking about this from the pulpit, but I believe this is God's mission employment opportunity. So I have no compunctions whatsoever about sharing this here. It's an AVS 2 position. AVS means you're going officially through the General Conference. You'll be covered with risk management insurance. We will provide round-trip airfare and lodging and even some meals because you'll be living on the school campus and eating with the students during the week. And then, just as a comparison point, my salary is no longer $25 a month, but it hasn't increased much. My salary now as the Director of Education and Development and as the CEO of this Gateway Corporation is $350 a month. Whoopee! Okay, so, all right. Having said that, I'm able to survive, and even with my family there, I still have my younger 2 kids with me, we're able to live off of this, okay? And furthermore, our Mongolian staff get paid even less than I do. Our Mongolian pastors get about $280 to $300 a month, and they're raising families of 3, 4, 5 kids. So it's definitely doable. Now, having said that, our AVS2s will be getting paid a whopping $1,200 a month. So you can not only live comfortably there, if you are frugal then you can actually save a nice little nest egg. Or if you have financial responsibilities at home, you can take care of your student loans, your car payments, or helping out at home, whatever. We want to make sure that everyone who comes gets a living wage, that we're not just leaving you there high and dry and then you go home and you're beggared and you're desperate. So we want to make sure that not only that you're able to come and not be stressed and worried about finances, but that you can focus wholly on God's mission. So the students, there are so many desperate students who need an Adventist education. I told you, we went from 0 Adventists in 1992 when I went there, and last spring when I was here, I told you we're at 2,600. We have reached the 3,000 mark. So praise the Lord, God is growing the church, but there are so many young people, and I know this is true here in North America too, but once they reach a certain age, for instance, we have a small elementary school attached to our central church. When they leave elementary school, they tend to leave church. So we need to stop this bleed now. We need to provide them with the opportunities for Adventist education now. So we need truly God-centered, mission-minded people. This morning, our brothers Jean-Pierre and Jackson, they shared, what is the biggest need? We need more workers. And this is true everywhere, not just in Congo and Uganda. This is true everywhere. We are desperate for more harvesters. We read it all the time. The harvest is great and the laborers are few, but it's not clicking. Oh, maybe that harvester is me. Is God calling you? Throw out your own Gideon test. You'll find out that God will answer. If you feel that burden, don't run away. Remember what my daughter said. The big fish is going to come and get you. Put your faith on the line. Try God and see if he is not faithful to you. If you feel like the timing is not right, maybe you better recheck your own chronology. Our timing is never right. We have to trust wholly in God's timing. You say, oh, but I need to go off to medical school or dental school. Well, remember, I told you I was supposed to go off to law school. And look at how God turned my life around. And a couple times, God is willing and ready to reset. All we need to be is ready and willing to accept. Okay, thank you.